All right, let's go back to Cleveland. You're looking at pictures from the New Spirit Revival Center. And yes, that is Don King, the famous boxing promoter, speaking to a group of pastors on a Midwest Vision and Values conference. And you see Donald Trump sitting behind Don King. Don King has finally decided to endorse Donald Trump, and I would assume he's speaking on Donald Trump's behalf. So let's talk about that with now CNN chief political correspondent Dana Bash, USA Today Washington correspondent Paul Singer, and politics editor for TheRoot.com, Jason Johnson. Jason, Don King. So he was not allowed to speak at the Republican National Convention. The RNC chair was not into Don King, but here he is speaking on behalf of Donald Trump. Helpful?
I mean, it may have a nominal impact in the city of Cleveland. Don King also owns the Call and Post, but it's not like he's got a tremendous amount of credibility. Again, most of these things that Donald Trump is doing at this point are not necessarily to really get black voters. It's much more of an attempt to sort of make himself appear less hostile. I've attended Pastor Darrell Scott's church. I have a pretty good idea what he's about. He's had absolutely no impact on that community. That church has been there for years. No one knows him politically. He literally only magically appeared on the scene once he became part of the Donald Trump campaign. So I don't see this making that much of a difference in the grand scheme of things, certainly not in Cuyahoga County, which is a pretty blue place.
And we should mention, Jason, that you are from Northeast Ohio. You're from Cleveland, right? So you spend a lot of time there, so you know what you're talking about. So why choose this event, you think?
Well, the reason why is because Pastor Darrell Scott is the only place Trump can go. I mean, this is the thing, you know, there's not a lot of places where he's going to be welcome. And let's be clear, we've seen, this is now the third African-American church that Donald Trump has attended. The first one, there was hardly anybody in the room. The second one, he attempted to make a political speech and then cowered in fear because the pastor had the audacity to tell him to actually talk about the church instead of making it political. He's now in a safe environment with a pastor who has no credibility locally, who has no credibility throughout the region, and it's going to be a safe place for him to have a town hall and promote his agenda. But again, if we look at the numbers, it doesn't change anything. Donald Trump is still at 2% in places like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. But I think this is part of his overall campaign to claim that I am a functional candidate, as opposed to someone who continually associates himself with terrorist organizations like the Klan.
So Dana, do you agree with Jason that this doesn't help at all with the African-American community?
I think that the way to look at Donald Trump's outreach to the African-American community is less about trying to get people on Donald Trump's side and more about trying to get the African-American community at least chip away a little bit at Hillary Clinton's numbers. Because when you look at a state like Ohio, perfect example. For Hillary Clinton to win, she's got to win big in the urban areas, and she's got to win big with the African-American voters. That's the Obama coalition. That's how President Obama did well in many of these battleground states. So for the Trump campaign to go into places like this and to, just to, as Jason was saying, to appear less objectionable, but more importantly, to make people stop and think, maybe even if it's just a small percentage, well, I'm not going to go out and vote for Hillary Clinton, even if they're not going to necessarily take the plunge and go for Donald Trump. That could make a difference, especially when up until last week or so, the enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton among black voters is not very high, especially among millennials, and that is what the Clinton campaign and the Democratic Party in general, they're working very hard on in these communities.
And Donald Trump has, in the last several days, trying to garner some support or enthusiasm among African-American voters. Listen to what he said last night.
We're going to rebuild our inner cities because our African-American communities are absolutely in the worst shape that they've ever been in before, ever. You take a look at the inner cities, you get no education, you get no jobs, you get shot walking down the street. They're worse. I mean, honestly, places like Afghanistan are safer than some of our inner cities.
So, Mark, there are so many untruths in what Donald Trump just said. Does he really think that the I'm sorry, I'll pose this question to Paul. So, Paul, there are a lot of untruths in what Donald Trump just said. So, who is he speaking for? Because some African Americans would listen to that and they would be appalled.
And keep in mind, he was doing that in North Carolina, and the shooting last night and the protests, riots that broke out afterwards were in North Carolina. And North Carolina at the moment is a swing state between Clinton and Trump. It is basically neck and neck in the polls. Notice this morning, Donald Trump sent out a couple of tweets saying that the violence and the unrest needs to stop. For the African American community, frequently when you say, well, their streets are dangerous, they will reply, yeah, it's because the cops are shooting at us. So I think you will see that Trump is in North Carolina trying to reach out, or at least trying to appear that he's reaching out to the black community, but I'm not sure he's speaking a language that they are particularly attuned to. He is focusing more on the law and order portion of this discussion about we shouldn't have protest in the streets. That is not something I think that is appealing directly to the black community, particularly in a state like North Carolina, particularly after last night.
And you know, it'll be interesting to see what he does say in this Cleveland church about the shootings that have taken place over the last several days involving police officers and African Americans. Hillary Clinton was on the Steve Harvey show yesterday. She brought up the shooting in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Here's what she said.
This horrible shooting again? How many times do we have to see this in our country? In Tulsa, an unarmed man with his hands in the air? I mean, this is just unbearable, and it needs to be intolerable. And so, you know, maybe I can, by speaking directly to white people, say, look, this is not who we are.
So, Jason, a couple of things here. First of all, we don't have all the facts in the Oklahoma case. We don't really know exactly what happened or why police felt they had to open fire. So isn't Hillary Clinton jumping the gun? Oh, that's a terrible... Forget I said that. Isn't Hillary Clinton getting ahead of herself?
No, Carol, not from the experience of most people in this country. But we have to recognize.
From the perspective of white voters, though, isn't she? Some white voters.
Not necessarily, because I think at this point, we've even seen this online in the last couple of days. There are people who were previously, for example, criticizing Colin Kaepernick, who after the shooting in Tulsa have turned around and said, you know, Jerry Rice and other athletes said, okay, we get it. That's pretty bad. This guy had his hands up. His car was messed up. So I don't think that Hillary Clinton is in any way harming her chances with white voters. Her key demographic right now, which is why she's on something like the Steve Harvey show, is she's got to get black millennials and Generation Xers to actually be enthusiastic about voting for her. That's what she's trying to do there. She's got the number of white voters that she's going to get. She's not going to increase or decrease it. It's the black vote she needs.
Yeah. All right, I want my panel to stay right there because I'm going to talk to you some more about all of this after a break. Still to come in the newsroom. We'll take